We may be consuming as much as a credit card's worth of plastic every week. That's what researchers are telling us. These synthetic polymers are in the salt we shake on our food, the beer we drink, and even in the air we breathe.
In the 1970s, globally, we were making about 30 million tons of plastic a year. When I last checked, I think the 2018 numbers, it was 360 million tons. Plastics are so ubiquitous, they're everywhere, and so it's not terribly shocking to find that they're, getting into our food and beverages.
Over time, plastic breaks down or chips off into small particles called microplastics. They range in size from 5 millimeters, which is about the end of an eraser, down to 1 micron. To compare, you can fit 1,000 microns on the tip of a pencil. Anything smaller is called a nanoparticle. Microplastics shed into our diets when we rip open a plastic package, pop ice cubes out of an old tray, or drink from a throwaway bottle.
If you compare tap water to bottled water, the ingestion annually, if you just drink tap water alone, is something like 4,000 particles, but if you drink bottled water, it could be 90,000. So it's like a 22-fold increase. There was a study that looked at the amount of plastics that's introduced when you open and close a bottle. So they opened and closed the bottle once, maybe 10 times and 100 times, and they found that you can actually be introducing microplastics just by that action. I went around to different grocery stores to buy all different types of salts, and this one has a grinding mechanism here. So talk about how packaging can contribute. The grinding mechanism is made out of plastic. So just the act of grinding the salt like this, you're probably adding little tiny bits of plastic. So these little activities, these little behavioral things that we do might be introducing microplastics when that was never the intention. If you've ever sat in an open window where the sunlight is coming in, you can kind of see all the little dust particles in the air. A proportion of that is likely synthetic polymers. And it can come from all kinds of things. It can come from just walking on the carpet that gets abraded, or your clothing, or your bedding.
It's even in the mesh that is meant to prevent erosion along waterways and at construction sites.
But this stuff just stays in the soil, and then you can see the grass kind of growing around it. And so over time, it's just going to break down, into tiny particles and either become part of the soil or wash into the creek. The first time we really knew about microplastics being a contamination issue is when researchers, biologists, found this stuff in the guts of seabirds that live far away from human settlements. So they were finding like a licensed albatross with its crop and its stomach just full of plastic refuse.
While she was a University of Minnesota intern, ecologist Mary Kosuth heard about a U.S. Geological Survey of 3 Great Lakes, Superior, Huron, and Erie. The study found an average of 43,000 plastic particles in every square kilometer. She contacted researcher Sherry Mason, who told Mary about another 2014 study that tested 24 brands of beer made in Germany and all contained plastic particles. In 2015, New York researchers found plastic in all the 15 brands of salt from China that they tested.
We were thinking, well, we could do the same thing here. So we looked at 12 brands of beer that draw their water from all 5 of the Great Lakes. And we also looked at 12 brands of salt that were just purchased here in the Twin Cities, but they're globally sourced. All of them had it. It really is ubiquitous. Now we're starting to look more at consumer products, and atmospheric fallout is something that's really gained a lot of traction since 2015. They've since looked at cities in China, in Iran, they've looked at London, even in really remote places. They found them on the western Antarctic Peninsula, so they really span the poles. They've found them in the Tibetan Plateau, which is like 13,000 feet above sea level. They found a plastic bag in the Marianas Trench, which is the deepest part of the ocean. So it's kind of astonishing how far-reaching this material is. Everyone wants to know, okay, so if it's there, you know, fine, but what sort of effect does that have on us, you know, on our health? And that is something that we don't quite understand yet. Three main issues really with plastic, like as far as the health effects go. One of them is the fact that they're made with things like UV stabilizers and additives, colorants, brominated flame retardants. There's all kinds of things that are added to plastics that when they break up, they can kind of leach into the guts of possibly humans, but also other organisms. Another problem is that when they're in the environment, they can kind of act as, they adsorb or take in things like PCBs or DDT or heavy metals.
Research is ongoing into plastic chemicals' impact on fertility, children's brain and organ development, and cardiovascular and immune systems. If microparticles are a problem, how do we get rid of them?
The wastewater treatment plants are sort of like a sieve that try and capture as much as possible, and they actually do a pretty decent job of it. They're able to sift out something like 72 to 99%. There's still an enormous quantity that ends up getting into the water. So if you were to walk into your house and you would find that it's flooding because you have the tap on, you know, probably the first thing you do isn't to go and grab a mop and start cleaning it up. Probably the first thing you do is you would shut off the tap. The vast majority of the plastic that we use is actually for packaging. It's like 39%. But packaging becomes a waste as soon as you receive the consumer product.
Silicone is an alternative to throwaway plastic. Even though it's made with synthetic polymers, it's reusable and resists high temperature, so it won't shed particles as easily. Reusable bags, bottles, natural fabrics, bar soap, glass storage containers, and buying in bulk are other options.
In the 1960s and 70s, when we started going from reusable cans and bottles to one-way cans and bottles, that people had to learn how to throw them out because they just weren't used to it. And when plastic bags first hit the grocery stores, people didn't like them because they didn't stand up and they were flimsy and they had problems with it because they were new. We learned to use these single-use plastics and they've made our lives more convenient, and I get that. But I spend most of my work days looking in a microscope and I see the consequences of those actions. And like I tested my snow last winter and we found some plastic particles in it. Weighing the pros and cons of those, I personally just don't think it's worth it to sacrifice our health and our children's health. And whenever I hear something like, oh, it'll take 400 years for the polystyrene to break down, what does that even mean? We don't truly know what happens to it. What we do know is that when it's left in the environment, depending on the conditions, it just breaks into smaller and smaller parts. And they're going to be around for a long time. So if we want to do something about that future, then we need to start making changes now.